this is really this white whale thing that I've been chasing, which is all based on a video game I played back in forever, the second Silent Hill game.
Yeah,
And it's really, yeah, I talked about it a lot back then. I apologize if my cat is a little on the
Oh, is that
side.
what's going on? Okay.
Yeah, if you see me
Catquake.
dealing with
Yeah.
Catquake, yeah. He so yeah, so Silent Hill. So if this idea of like abandoned places is kind of like a purgatory state, right? It's the game is it's sort of like a survival horror game where you wander around, and the video game that's inspired by, you wander around fighting monsters, but it turns out to all be a metaphor for your character's, like, guilty state of mind. And I've just really been fascinated by that as like this externalization of internal feeling. And I've actually made several stabs at this, which is why the current version is called Variations on a Quiet and Lonely Hell. Because I'm thinking about doing multiples of them, just doing them all. So the one I'm focusing on is basically called Variations on a Quiet and Lonely Hell #1. And what I like about this version is, I guess I'll talk about the superstructure a bit.
Actually, at that point, this is where I jump in, if that's all right.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's my question now. This is where we jump in, or where I start, which is, let's focus on the sensations and imagery of play, regardless of how you eventually design play. What are the what's the fundamental imagined material that happens because we play?
Sure.
I don't mean like the outcome. I mean, what does it look like when it's ongoing?
Right. So there's kind of two states in this version. One is kind of like an urban dungeon crawl. You're just you're going through buildings in an abandoned town that you have some connection with in the past, and you're looking for something. Okay. Like, that's part of character creation, is you say what you're looking for, and you go sort of room through room in various locations, and you encounter things. Those things could be, and they're kind of taunting things. They could be anything from like an object.
You kind of sound like a video game developer telling me what gameplay is like. I want to know what it's like in far more fictional, experiential terms.
No, that's what I mean. I mean, so you're in a room, right?
Right. There you go. And I'm in a room, and yes,
you're in a room, right? And I guess really the flow does kind of matter, because you're in a room, and one of the first questions you get is, once the room is described. So there's a GM. There's a thing about the GM I'll get to later. The room is described to you, and then the player responds, "This reminds me of the time when." And then fictionally, we go to a flashback scene, which is generally centered around like why you're here and what you're looking for. So in that flashback scene, we could be, I did do a small playtest of this, and it was like, I remember a time when I was on a lake with my young brother, and we were fighting about something, and he started to drown, and I just kind of left him there, and I let him drown. And then we played out the scene where it's like, okay, you're on the boat, your brother is struggling, what do you do? And we played out the scene, and then eventually, the person's father came out and discovered them and scolded him for letting his, brother potentially drown. And then once we finish the flashback scene, the GM uses the contents of the flashback scene to create a more monstrous version of that in the room that you're exploring. So it basically becomes like a dungeon encounter, right? Yeah. And you encounter something in the room that is like more horrific
I remember when I let my brother drown and he almost died. And then, to be particularly unsubtle about it, the weed festooned, soaked corpse, you know, of your brother or perhaps just anyone, looms up from the water.
Whatever room you're,
right,
the room happened to be like in this one playtest, the room was like the courtyard of a building that had a fountain.
Exactly.
It was
I was
like
going to say, there's got to be water there
yeah.
for the memory. So
there's got
that's
to be
where,
water there, right? That's what evoked the memory.
But what I'm saying is my example, right? Then the weed covered, water soaked, waterlogged corpse,
yeah, exactly.
Stumbles.
Yeah, it could. Okay. It could be more subtle than that, but that is the extreme end. Right. That is the big thing would be like literally a monster. Like
okay. Got it. Okay, yeah. So you said there were sort of two aspects of play. Are those the two aspects, or is there another entire unit?
So that's the tricky thing. Like that cycle I've tested, right? And I think it works really well. The part that I'm struggling with is that there kind of is another aspect, but I'm not, and I know what I want it to be about, but I'm not really sure how to make it work, which is that because it is a multi-PC game, and for the most part, they're sort of in their own little isolated location. But there are moments where they can meet. And there's two types of those meetings. One is one-on-one, like I want to have a scene with you, and they sort of meet in some mutual location. And then between the big giant locations of, for lack of a better word, between dungeons, the whole group meets up. There's sort of a group like moot, right? And that I'm more foggy on. like I want those moments of like connection, right? And that's kind of what they're meant to be, is like almost like micro therapy sessions. But the core cycle is so powerful because I've played it and it was really intense. Like it was really freaking intense that it's like, that is foggy for me. It's like, okay, so you meet up and what, you just talk about your feelings, you share the encounter. Like I don't
right. This is sort of an interesting quality, because as soon as you start talking about a place or even any kind of meeting location between or among or separate from all of the little urban pockets, then we suddenly say, well, wait a minute, what the hell are we talking about? Are we talking about some huge, honeycomb webwork of little individualized urban pockets, and then we meet in, sort of the safe zone? I don't know. It seems to me you're going to have to embrace one thing or the other of these two things. Okay. One of these things is something I see a lot in my Netflix array, which is a dramatized and sort of more deeply characterized version of a digital game, of a computer game. So you have things like save points, and you have things like meetup phase, and you have things like, sort of a structural gameplay framework that if the setting you see on the screen needs to have a magic circle so this can happen, well, then you have one. It's just there. It's part of it. Right. And so then when you watch the dramatized version and the TV show version, I'm old, I still call it TV. When you see that, then you could be watching it, and if you know the game, then you say, oh, look, so that's how they did the magic circle. It's, they sort of ramped it up a little bit in content so that it's at least sort of understandable. It's not just a circle on the screen. So, but not much. I mean, it's still arbitrarily there because there's a meetup circle in the game. And I'm thinking of, what's the name of it? And I hope I don't go down a rabbit hole with this, but trying to remember the name. But there was a Japanese Netflix show that was based on a manga whose setting was very much a game within it. I mean, very much a game that the
it's like there's a couple like that. Actually,
there's a bunch. I suspect
it's a whole genre.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Yeah. And so If
Yeah.
you do that, then you embrace the digitality of it all. And
Hmm.
if you're doing a manga, the manga would obey the rules of a, the story would
Yeah.
obey the rules of a console game, whatever.
Right.
And if you're going to do a role playing game, well, you just do. It just does.
Right.
Um, and you don't even bother with justifying it. You just say, that's the way this. I mean, I know my idiom that I am borrowing from for this role playing
Right.
game, and we're just going to do
Yeah.
that. And even if,
Yeah.
in fact, maybe even the more arbitrary it is, the more you admit it, the better.
Hmm.
Whereas if you want to say, throw that to the winds and say, I'm informed by the aesthetics of some of these kinds of games, or I've got my own sense of aesthetics, for this. Then you're in a slightly more difficult position where you then have to say something like, all right, what, what is this whole thing? I mean, what is this? It takes us back to the issue of Cube, right?
Yep.
I mean,
Cube.
the whole
Yeah.
point of Cube, and in terms of the overall bigger setting, made the Cube, who stuck them in it, why, and all that stuff. It's
Yeah.
almost like, here, geek bait. Here, you guys go off and have internet discussions about that.
Yeah.
Right?
About what the
Screw
Cube is
you.
about. Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you.
Screw you.
Screw you. I'm just in
Yeah.
a movie of the game. And then we made characterizations in it so the actors could, the characters can have conflicts, but that's what we did. And that's what it's for. You start asking me who did it, why, what for, what does Pinhead do when he's not being, a Cenobite in the horror movie? What's the culture of the Cenobites, and all that kind of stuff. Fuck you.
Yeah.
Forget it. And
I
so
hate questions like that.
I know, I know. But the question then is, what? In other words, if you pick the wrong answer and you start trying to address it, you're just going to drive yourself crazy.
Right.
You kind of have to embrace one or the other. Is this or isn't this some kind of yeah?
The current design definitely sort of goes with the former, where it's because the whole game is very structured. It's like enter a room, have a flashback, encounter a thing, move on to the next room, encounter a flashback, right? And then, but basically between rooms is when any player can basically, before they go on to their next room in their dungeon habitat, right? They can say, I want to have a scene with this other character. And then they enter some, and it's actually described to be, it's meant to be weird because they could be across town, but yet somehow they sort of enter some liminal shared weird space, right? Where they can encounter each other. And then the minute they choose to leave the room, even if they thought they were going together, they end up in two different, they end up in two different spaces.
So how come the big meetups have to be any different? Why aren't they just?
No, they're not really any different.
Yeah. Why aren't they just they occur when somebody says I want to meet up with everyone and there's agreement,
Oh, that's interesting. They could be in agreement. Right now, they just kind of happen between locations. Like when everybody wraps up their location, right? When everybody's done their current their current self dungeon, right? There's a meetup scene, right? You all meet at a diner and one of the GMs sort of picks.
Right.
Yeah.
You could. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, I suppose. I guess what I'm saying is that if you're going to go with the former model, then you go right ahead and do it and, color it up. I mean, why? Okay, so we each have our flashlights, our knee pads, or whatever each of us, is toting through the urban spelunking. And I'm crawling through broken desks in the old elementary school, listening to the heavy breathing of the whatever's coming down the hall and all that sort of thing, right? I'm doing that. Oh, and then, in all of a sudden, then I enter when I desire, and at such a proper time, I enter into communion with Bob. And there's, who knows, maybe that's all gray and, and dust cloudy and who knows what visual effects, are involved.
Yeah.
It's not normal space. We,
right.
We do that. And then when everybody's done with their various encounters, then we cut and we're all in the Denny's where we seem to always meet.
Right.
ordering
No,
our
I mean that,
breakfast, and nobody even knows whether this Denny's actually like exists relative to any of these urban spots, right? I mean, is this the real world? Are we all just, are we all just like real people who meet in the Denny's together? Oops, did I?
well, that's interesting. Like, so like
Or
it's
is it
like the
the other way
shared,
around?
yeah,
Maybe this Denny's
right,
is our heaven. We're in heaven in Denny's, right? And the
right,
other is the real world. Who cares? If it's the former
yeah,
model, then who cares? Right?
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's that. I think that definitely covers the transitions, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I'm perfectly comfortable with the idea of just like you walk out the door and then all of a sudden you're in Denny's, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Like that.
And
That
dressed
isn't really.
differently, and there's waiters and normal people, eating breakfast and
Yeah.
cars going by and all the rest of it, right? Yeah.
Right. Oh, God, that's interesting. Even more normalized. Even okay. That's huh.
Okay, I don't mean to like
Yeah.
take over the aesthetics of your game.
No, no, no,
I'm
no,
trying
no,
to
no. But I
show
mean, that's
contrasting is the key, right?
right. But the idea is to make, but there is an interesting idea in pumping up the contrast of
Right.
the group meets, right, from
Right.
everything else, and that's
Yeah.
something I had thought about.
Well, it's also
Um,
nice too because
yeah,
again, geek bait. Now everybody can go off to their internet forums and debate on which one's real,
right. Rich one's
right?
real.
And then
Yeah, that.
as the
Yeah,
developer, you can be amusing and like keep throwing
yeah,
out clues in each direction to drive everybody crazy.
yeah. Well, also, the interesting thing that you're suggesting is that the group meetup place, which I wasn't thinking about, is the same every time.
Oh,
Because
I
I was
suppose.
just
Yeah.
thinking that I was just, yeah, but that's an interesting idea
Mm-hmm.
because to me it's like that almost might get, because the problem that I'm having with, like, especially even imagining this is that, okay, we start the scene, you're in a diner, all of you, right? What do the players do? like I know that, like, I want them to, like this is supposed to be like a pause, right? It's supposed to be a chance to talk and connect and share thoughts in character, right? But it's like,
Well, yes, although
yeah,
again we're okay. Now
yeah,
we're getting into a very
yeah,
different question.
yeah.
Um, and the different question is let's stay with the aesthetics
Okay.
before we talk about the functionality of this scene. There is
Okay.
in many ways a toxic, that word is overused today, but it does seem to
Yeah.
apply to so nicely to so many things that I can't help it. But
Yeah.
in this case, I think there has been a toxic phenomenon in indie game design,
Hmm.
in which everything basically is an engineered little skit,
Right.
and each
Yeah.
scene and set of rules that go with this type of scene are effectively an app or an app subroutine,
Right.
and that's why you get people doing these bullshit reviews where they like pull the game out of the box from and in its package from the Kickstarter shipment and make a big deal out of unboxing it, and then they're flipping through it and reading and saying, okay folks, let's find the killer app right in the
Right.
game. And at which
Yeah.
point I then really wish that I could become the Ringu girl and crawl through the screen and drown them. But the idea here is that instead, if we focus on the aesthetics of it and
Hmm.
find that those aesthetics are communicable to other real people when we play,
Hmm.
and communicable in the way that we like in role playing, which means they pick it up and do shit with it, and you see that aesthetic returned, in others' hands and in others' minds, as we play, then then that's good. That's the requirement. That's the baseline. That's the functionality. And then what you and I think of as game mechanics can be thought
Hmm.
of as put in the ones that are needed at specific points when they're needed,
Right.
um, and that's good enough. Maybe the soft interconnection is enough, right? It's not
Hmm.
like every single kind of scene has to hook into every single kind of resolution in every single kind of way, like this enormous clockwork, role playing experience.